So, just jumping right in, I really love how at the very start of the chapter, Oda drew attention to the fact that because Luffy is one of the pirate emperors now, he does have certain protections from the Navy and government in the sense where it's not just a thing where they can just engage him outright. They do have to go through certain channels, and they do have to get approval from the higher ups when it comes to getting any capture or kill orders. And even though the whole situation itself did still devolve into a fight against CP0 in the backdrop of the fight of Lucci versus Luffy, I like how through Kaku and Stussy, Oda continuously drew attention to all the different ways that there were going to be repercussions for Lucci's actions, and how when you get down to it, Lucci and CP0 as a whole aren't going to come out of this clean. That there is a promise of consequences there, which I'm not going to lie is a pretty refreshing switch up and shows even more just how much the government is kind of losing a little bit control. Like I don't want to say they've tightened their vice grip, but at the same time, it hasn't been enough in order to keep control maybe of how much of a wild card that I guess Lucci has become. It also explains though as to why Vegapunk wanted Luffy's help. He knew Luffy's status would act as a protective shield, to protect him. Although to Lucci's credit, the fact that he did break protocol at all is a weird sign of growth on his part, as before he was basically eternally loyal to the government and did whatever he was asked and followed orders, but now he's perfectly fine with bending the rules a little if it means completing the mission. But even more, it feels like Lucci honestly genuinely cares less about consequences now if there's an opportunity to have some fun, which I also kind of appreciate. Like it's just kind of great in order to see that this just this more fun side of Lucci, who just kind of who still I think cares about acting as a government agent, but he also cares less about about the protocols of how you conduct yourself now. Which I'd say Lucci's, and truthfully, it did kind of still work out in the end. Like, don't get me wrong, I think even though it did kind of work out, Lucci's still going to face consequences of some kind. But the fact remains, the whole how the situation played out did still kind of work to Lucci's whole intent to begin with, as the fight with Luffy, it ultimately did from straw out like Sentomaru, and because Sentomaru was out in the open, Lucci was able to wrest control of the Seraphims from him. So in that regard, you could say that Lucci did, I guess, follow orders. He just did about it in a very roundabout way by fighting Luffy, because he probably knew Vegapunk would order Sentomaru to help him, which again led to the current situation we're in now. All that aside, though, I suppose we do need to talk about Vegapunk's whole hypothesis on devil fruits and how they, at least from the way it's described, the way he describes it, devil fruits are almost a creation of imagination. So all powers, all the names given to these fruits, they're only given such names after the fact, as the abilities themselves, again, to my understanding, are born of the will of those that eat them. So the power of Sun God Nika is the true power of Luffy's devil fruit, whereas the abilities to stretch the elasticity of his body, the way Luffy has fought from the beginning of the series, all of that are the powers born of Luffy's will and imagination. At least if I'm understanding the context of it correctly. But yeah, it's like it's saying that. Basically, he's saying that all devil fruits are created of a single entity, of a god possibly, and of course we can't let the whole thing with different dimension, a person living and a person possibly creating devil fruits go undiscussed either, because with this reveal, on top of everything we've gotten so far about the Void Century, the Unnamed Kingdom, King's origins as well, or hell, even literally God Valley itself, like Oda really seems to be pushing the idea that all devil fruits, and in some ways existence itself to a degree, all derive from the existence of a true god or a godlike being. someone with the powers of creation, because that would also be the only thing that makes sense in terms of why the current power structure exists. Like, I'm Eam aside, because we still don't know what the fuck he is, although I'm betting there's still some kind of connection correlation there. Like, when you get down to it, the government power structure is at its core, and how it exists is ruled by false gods, i.e. celestial dragons. And we know the 19 kings all came together to form the government we all know, which we all know the story, but at the same time, that's still never fully explained how the threat of the Forgotten Kingdom and the Void Century comes into play. So at this point, like, it can only be assumed that the current world order stole the power of the gods from whatever entity stole the power of the gods and buried the history to hide the true heritage of just the devil fruits, these powers, all of that. Like, that's the only thing that makes sense based on Vegapunk's theory, and for now, all routes to knowing what this truly means, at least to me, do lead back to Eam, because right now he seems to be being built up as the person having the biggest connection to this part of history, and how just these powers, the power of these powers that exist, connect back to whatever god or whatever godlike being existed, and how the power. It almost seems to also be implying as well that the power of a devil fruit's awakening is the power of that god, of that godlike being, or whoever is responsible for creating these devil fruits. It's like it all connects back to the existence of, like, almost a true devil fruit god or something like that. I don't know, but it seems to be all pointing within that direction almost. Or at least how it plays into the lineage factor as well. Like, I think that's the other thing, is that the lineage factor seems to be kind of connected to these. I wouldn't be surprised if the lineage factor of devil fruits somehow connects back to Eam at the very least. But yeah, with Sentomura basically clinging to life, it is one of those. But with all that being said, though, I do want to talk about the fact that we're basically going on another break. That we're going on another break, but specifically also that going into the new year, Oda is going to be taking a couple breaks. Like the first couple of weeks of One Piece, he's really only going to be releasing one chapter with a break in between. And honestly, I'm kind of okay. Frankly, I'm kind of okay with Oda getting more breaks, honestly, because I know it's probably going to slow down the timeline he set for himself, that it's going to end in 3 years. Like with him kind of operating in between these breaks for the first couple weeks, I imagine like the time it takes to get to the end is probably going to be more 4 years than 3, but at this point, but yeah, I'm honestly, like, I'm perfectly okay with it, because as far as I'm concerned, with how many mangaka have died of overwork or whatever else, I'm perfectly okay with them having as much break time as they need. Although when it comes to Oda, you still also got to wonder how much of that time he actually spends on a break, because I think we also common knowledge that even when the man's on break, he's still working to some degree. So, like, how much of that break is it really worth, too? But yeah, getting back to the chapter itself, though, with Sentomura basically clinging to life, it is one of those moments that makes me say we have reached, like, the climax point, the turning point of this arc, where now there's really only one of two directions this goes, which is that either Vegapunk dies or he escapes. And weirdly enough, right now I am kind of going more in the latter direction right now, because with the idea planted in our heads that Vegapunk and Dragon know each other, I feel that Vegapunk is going to act as the tether that brings Dragon and Luffy together. Like the other, like when you really look at it, like if Vegapunk does escape, I'm having a hard time imagining a scenario where he remains with the Straw Hats indefinitely, given Luffy's protection as an emperor does have its limitations. So the only other safe place for Vegapunk would be with the revolutionaries and Dragon, which would also potentially lead to him lean towards Luffy learning about Sabo, which, even if Sabo isn't dead, the whole thing of what happened is definitely going to be an interesting sticking point to this father and son reunion. But as a whole, like, it just feels like Vegapunk is the key towards reuniting Luffy and Dragon, and just learning, and just with all that we've learned so far from Vegapunk about the origin factor of devil fruits, about where the theory of where devil fruits come from. It feels like the most common thing to happen, and like if we're to learn more, it feels like Dragon is the next logical step for that as well. And again, there's no guarantee this is the route it's going to go, but it feels like the most logical route if it should go with Vegapunk right now, aside from the possibility of him being captured by the government. But again, escape and reuniting with Dragon feels like the more plausible route in terms of moving the story forward right now. Although the thing I'll be curious about the most is how many of Vegapunk's satellite clones are going to escape with him, because I can only imagine with just knowing that Lucci has awakened his devil fruit, escape isn't going to be as easy as you might think it'll be. Like, I think there's going to be a couple that might actually die in the escape effort. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much all I got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, Analyze Crunchyroll, be sure to notification bell, hit the subscribe button, and just share it around, guys. Dark Knight of Anime signing off. Later, everyone.